I'm very pleased to welcome you. I'm Sarah Pritchard. I'm the president of the Caxton Club. The Caxton Club is especially pleased to join with Smithsonian Libraries and Archives and the Biodiversity Heritage Library in presenting this program this evening as part of the annual meeting of the Biodiversity Heritage Library. There are many other organizations who collaborate with all three of these organizations, but I'm going to spare you a long list. We have a wonderful set of panelists, and to introduce the panel, I would like to welcome Tamar Evangelistia Doherty, the director of Smithsonian Library and Archives.
Thank you, Sarah. And I want to say a special thank you to Jackie Vossler from the Caxton Club, former Caxton Club president and Smithsonian Libraries and Archives Advisory Board member, for inviting us here tonight. And you'll notice all around you there are many, many Smithsonian people in the room. Good evening, everyone. I'm really honored to address the Caxton Club as the inaugural director of Smithsonian Libraries and Archives. I'm a rare book lover, a collector, and especially I'm a native Chicagoan. Caxtonians as a captive audience are uniquely ideal for this program, for those of us who are lovers of books, libraries, archives, and the pursuit of knowledge. And history has taught us something as librarians in Chicago, that the best way to achieve our collective goals, to meet the needs of scholars while making the best use of our expertise and resources, is to come together, also known as collaboration. Collaboration ignores the status quo, and each organization involved uses the superpowers of their collections, their staff, and their resources for discovery and positive change for the benefit of all. Now, the Chicago area libraries and archives community is no stranger to collaborations in the form of consortiums. In my own professional biography, two great ones come to mind. One is the Black Metropolis Research Consortium, BMRC, at the University of Chicago, founded in 2007 by the Dean of Humanities, Danielle Allen, which sought to uncover and make accessible through digital portals materials related to Black life in the Chicagoland area. How many of you have heard of the BMRC in the room? First. I was very proud to serve as the first archivist and later executive director of that consortium. The other notable great Chicago libraries collaboration for the benefit of discovery and access is the Chicago Collections Consortium, which was founded in 2012 by Honorable Mary Case, University Librarian and Dean Emerita of the libraries at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and David Spadafora, who was the 8th president of the Newberry Library. CCC's mission as a collaboration among libraries, museums, and allied organizations to work together to collect, preserve, share freely, openly, and equitably, which is really important, the history and culture of Chicago with the world. On this special night, we come together to learn of yet another consortium of epic proportions, which connects the biodiversity heritage collections of the world's largest museum library system, that is the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives, with those from such prestigious institutions as Yale University, the Kew Gardens, the New York Botanic Gardens, but also, of course, because we're all gathered here tonight in this wonderful room in the Union League Club, there's a Chicago story here. Because when it comes to books, knowledge, and history, there's always a Chicago connection. Before I introduce the speakers, I want to take an intentional pause and dedicate tonight's program to a very special librarian whose star now shines brightly above us. Nancy E. Gwynn, Director Emerita of Smithsonian Libraries, transitioned from this life plane only a few weeks ago. It's because of her vision and spirit of collaboration as a founding member of BHL that we owe its existence. Tonight, you will learn about a very important resource that represents a fusion of discovery, digital preservation, knowledge transmission, and innovative collaboration. Biodiversity is central to the fabric of our lives. It is central to the increase and diffusion of knowledge at the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives, and beyond to the city of big shoulders of Chicago. Please let's honor Nancy Gwynn in our thoughts and admiration as we enjoy this program. And afterward, I kind of task with you, especially as Caxtonians, if you can offer any insightful reflections on the potentiality of collaboration and connections between your pursuits as book lovers and scholars with the vast world of the Biodiversity Heritage Library. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our esteemed panelists. Martin Kalfatovic is the Associate Director of Smithsonian Libraries and Archives Digital Initiatives and Scholarly Communications, where he is responsible for the library's active digital library program. This program includes the creation of digital editions of library materials, online exhibitions, and new digital publications. Martin also serves as the program director for the library's participation in the Biodiversity Heritage Library, working with an international consortium of natural history and botanical libraries in the digitization of taxonomic literature. I'm pleased to say, and congratulations, that in July of 2024, Martin will take on a new role as the executive director of the IIIF Consortium. Leora Siegel is senior director at the Lenhardt Library at the Chicago Botanic Garden, whose mission is to cultivate the power of plants to sustain and enrich life. Leora has a diverse portfolio of work experience in the field of library administration and started her career at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in 1991 as acting assistant agricultural librarian and visiting assistant professor of library administration. She was in this role until 1994, and in 1997 joined DePaul University as a reference librarian. She then moved to the Chicago Botanic Garden, where she has held the position of library director. Gretchen is a museum librarian and head of library collections for the Mary Louise Rosenthal Library at the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. There she oversees and coordinates all aspects of collections care and management for the library, including the archives, photo archives, rare books, and the general collections. Gretchen sets priorities and strategy for museum collections operations in collaboration with other science directors and heads under the direction of the Director of Collections and VP for Science and Education. Gretchen has also worked in both public and academic libraries as a reference librarian. So I give it over to our esteemed panel.
Thank you, Tamar, and thank you, Sarah, and a special thanks to Jackie, whose great support for Smithsonian Libraries and Archives, and again, all things books. It's just been a fabulous contribution to so many things. I'm here tonight to give an introduction to the Biodiversity Heritage Library, and then we'll have Leora and Gretchen give a little bit more detail about the Chicago connection. So I'm going to introduce about this portions of my talk with the sort of some comments from our various users around the world. And I want to start out with Dr. John Sullivan. Science is all about disseminating knowledge and building upon what has come before. Yet so much of our knowledge of plants and animals has remained inaccessible to those who would make use of it. This has been a major part of the taxonomic impediment. Likewise, Darwin and colleagues in 1847 noted that the cultivation of natural sciences cannot be efficiently carried on without reference to an extensive library. And it's that library we've now created with the Biodiversity Heritage Library that is through a number of services that you see here, through species description, distribution records, climate records, etc., that we now have much more knowledge about what we have on our planet. The taxonomic impediment has been generated because much of this knowledge has been locked up in books, databases, etc., that are not accessible to the larger public. And it's only through making them fairly accessible, interoperable, that we can actually get this knowledge out and use it for learning more about life on our planet. So again, the Biodiversity Heritage Library, through our collaboration, is what has created this and made this success available. So here's our homepage. Here's our homepage. So the BHL has been around for approximately 8 years. We've provided free and open access, and it's important that the free part and the open part, because again, science needs to be interoperable, accessible, and open. Otherwise, it cannot be reusable in the various ways in which science is needed. A quote from one of our other users, a coastal ecologist: BHL is an excellent, unique initiative that creates a virtuous circle in which scientific knowledge is available to those who need it the most, helping them to produce more knowledge and bridging geographic and cultural frontiers as if they didn't exist. And again, I'll just note that biodiversity doesn't know the national borders that we see when we look at a map, because it transcends all of those. BHL today is a global consortium comprised of 19 members and 23 affiliates and over 100 contributors around the world. And we span all of the continents except Antarctica. And I keep trying to convince someone to take a scanner and a book to Antarctica and scan it so that we can actually just cover all of the continents, but that's probably not really a terribly green thing to do. I won't even let you linger on these too long, but as you will note, the members and affiliates of BHL are the primary and major biodiversity repositories of the world: the natural history museums, the botanic gardens, the research centers, the Association of Research Libraries, and many of our other biodiversity partners around the world. So here are our members, and then again our affiliates, many of whom are represented in the room tonight. BHL also partners with a number of what we call the biodiversity acronyms. So again, you see some of them on the screen: CTOF, TADWIG, GBIF, EOL, Europeana, DPLA, BLR, all of these different acronyms that contribute to help us understand globally and collaboratively life on our planet. But we are in Chicago, and I just want to sort of take a few notes to talk a little bit about the Biodiversity Heritage Library's relationship to Chicago. I don't know if many of you recognize this, but this is the lobby of the Intercontinental Hotel just down the street on Michigan Avenue. In 2004, myself and colleagues from the Smithsonian, Suzanne Pilsk, and from the Missouri Botanical Garden, Chris Freeland and Doug Holland, were here for an Institute of Museum and Library Services meeting. And we sat on this couch in the Intercontinental Hotel with a napkin and sketched out what became the Biodiversity Heritage Library. So again, you actually do happen on napkins. It really does happen. I think they've renovated the lounge. I haven't been there in a couple of years, but I don't think it looks quite the same. So again, our other Chicago connections include the Field Museum, which was one of our founding partners in the Biodiversity Heritage Library, and of course the Chicago Botanic Garden. And just a call out, this new logo that you have, Leora, is really fabulous. I just love it. It comes in different colors. You can use it in different ways. I love the logo. Also in 2011, the Biodiversity Heritage Library had a major conference at the Field Museum called Life and Literature. We brought together over 100 different participants from around the world, scientific researchers, librarians, informaticians, etc., to talk about what our next steps would be for BHL as we were ending our first funding cycle through, again, MacArthur Foundation based here in Chicago. So this conference brought together a number of our participants and really roadmapped out how BHL transitioned from a grant-funded organization to the membership organization that we have today. In 2015, we had our annual meeting at the Field Museum. And again, one of the key things at this meeting was it initiated what we called BHL Day. And we will have one of these tomorrow. And this is a symposium where we invite outside speakers, users of BHL, to talk about how BHL actually transforms their work on a day-to-day basis. So this week, we are again continuing our BHL annual meeting here in Chicago. We started at the fabulous Botanic Garden yesterday, which was incredibly dreary and cold. It was surprisingly cold, so that was kind of shocking. And then we were at the Field Museum today, and we'll continue there tomorrow. I'd also like to thank our governance committee who are here tonight. Our BHL is managed by an executive committee represented by David Iggulden from the Royal Botanic Garden Kew, Kelly Try from just down the pike in Urbana-Champaign, and our own Gretchen from here in Chicago. But increasingly important is, again, our secretariat, the people who actually run BHL on a day-to-day basis. And they are all here tonight. Colleen Funkhauser, who is a program manager extraordinaire. Bianca Crowley, who is our collections manager, who actually coordinates what actually goes into BHL on a day-to-day basis. And JJ Dearborn, who is taking on the incredibly important role of transforming 600 years of printed material into actionable digital data that can interact with all the different data systems that the biodiversity community relies on a day-to-day basis. The BHL provides access to literature that would otherwise be impossible to find or otherwise know that it existed. It's important to have access to a biodiversity library that has done so well to document the past, as this is vital to our understanding of the future. So what does BHL have? BHL has 61 million, just short of 62 million. I was very upset we couldn't click over to 62 million before today or yesterday. 194,000 titles and 309,000 volumes. And if you look across the BHL partnership, if you look at the major natural history and botanic garden libraries, BHL has more volumes now than most all of the natural history libraries and botanic gardens in the world. There are very few that have more than that. Also, when we say heritage, people think about old stuff, but in actuality, BHL doesn't have just old stuff, but it has stuff from just yesterday. So again, thanks a lot to the work of Bianca Crowley. We work with intellectual property holders to negotiate licenses and permissions to provide information that has just been published in the last few days in many cases. So BHL comprises of literature that may have just been published the other day. I'd also like to highlight a very important portion of BHL, which are field notes. Field notes are the work of scientists and researchers in these major institutions who go out into the field and write in little tiny notebooks in incredibly illegible handwriting all around the world and bring them back and then store them on shelves in the middle of the sun, and they deteriorate rapidly. I'll call out Tammy Peters, who is somewhere here, who is the chief archivist at Smithsonian Libraries and Archives. And again, controlling and providing access to these field notes is vital. These are often the primary sources for a lot of species descriptions. And a lot of the work that BHL is doing now is transcribing these field notes and then actually converting them again into actionable data. And we've had a number of successful projects around field notebooks to provide access to this information. I'd also like to highlight this quote from Dr. Lydia Ponce de la Vega, who has actually received her doctorate since this slide was originally made, from McGill University. And Lydia has worked extensively with BHL to actually look at BHL and the literature of natural history, because this literature has been generated by 500 years of primarily Northern Hemisphere colonial work. So again, these are people who have gone into indigenous areas, who have taken this knowledge, and what Lydia has been doing is working to actually help decolonize this information, to extract the science from it so that we are not actually dealing with all of the other ancillary things that happen around science. And to that end, BHL has developed an acknowledgement of harmful content. And what this does is actually it helps the users of BHL separate the science from the content in many ways, so that again, you don't actually have to think as much about how explorers who might have been talking about native communities in controversial ways and actually extract the science from those. BHL provides free access to literature for researchers around the world that don't have good libraries in their institutions. Research is much faster and better when the bibliography needed to work is freely available. We are very blessed in most of our institutions with fabulous libraries, with fabulous research librarians, with archivists, with collections that actually provide our researchers with this. But one of the things BHL early on discovered was that many researchers in the global south would be spending their research money, their research time, coming to the Northern Hemisphere to our libraries and standing in front of photocopy machines. And they would be standing there photocopying literature instead of looking at specimens in the collections or working with their colleagues. So the BHL, by providing access to this literature through computers on their desktops in their home institutions, has freed them up to do much more positive work when they do spend those valuable funds to come to our institutions in the global north. BHL is all about free services. We provide APIs, we provide taxonomic name searching. We have Dima Mazaran and Jeff from the Illinois Natural History Survey, who are world experts on taxonomic intelligence in finding species names. Dima and Jeff are beyond compare in terms of scientific computing, in terms of scientific research around species names. We also provide metadata exports. We provide custom PDF downloads, article indexing, and really important, and we have a member of our team here that works on digital object identifiers, which provide access to BHL literature in the contemporary scientific ecosystem. So DOIs take something from Linnaeus in 1758 and make Linnaeus citable in an article today, and this is an insider joke, up Linnaeus's H index in case he needs tenure. So that's a bad insider joke. In terms of our users, we have 15 million plus users, 31 million visitors to our usage over time. And we've had visitors from every country in the world, including North Korea and Mali, which were the last two to click over. The Biodiversity Heritage Library is an amazing resource for visual artists. Any artist interested in learning about natural history and science would consider these rare resources invaluable. One of our big projects was to extract these from these 600 years of literature, the fabulous illustrations, many of which you've seen tonight, and provide them freely available through open licensing in various platforms. Our primary platform right now is the Flickr project, Flickr, where we've had over 319,000 images provided and 1.5 billion users over time. It was also great to be named Wired Magazine's one of the top science feeds of the year. And really importantly is we are now moving beyond Flickr and moving these images into the Wikimedia Commons so they're even more freely and openly available. And we have with us Siobhan Leachman from New Zealand, who's a Wikimedian, who is working extensively to, again, provide access to these through the broader wiki community. BHL supercharges the speed and efficiency of scholarly research. As a free mobile archive of for natural history literature, BHL is ideal for 21st century research, which can happen on the field, in a museum, or at a coffee shop, as long as there's an internet connectivity. And one of the things we've heard, again, from researchers who might be in subtropical Africa, that it's easier for them to get a satellite connection to a device than it is to travel to London to see a material. So again, this connectivity, no matter how slow it may seem to us in the Northern Hemisphere, is still more easy than traveling to the Northern Hemisphere. I'd also like to say that BHL is really well beloved by researchers around the world. One of the primary ways that we can actually get encomiums from our scientific researchers is to have a species named after you. So at the Smithsonian, a Smithsonian scientist named a fossil fly species after BHL. But wait, there's more. We also, again, had this particular mollusk named after BHL. So again, these are some of the key ways in which the scientists recognize the importance of BHL to their day-to-day research. BHL is radically changing the status quo and democratizing access to knowledge about biodiversity. Now, anyone in the world has instant access to the original species descriptions in a couple of clicks. I don't know if there are any lawyers in the audience, but if you're familiar with the shepherdizing process of legal research, biodiversity research is very similar to legal research. So again, when you are tracking back for legal research, you need to track back that law to the original version of the law. Similar with species names, when you are trying to establish a new species or change a name, you need to actually trace it back through the literature, back to that original description so that you can actually prove this is a new species or a change in the species. And this is why researchers spend so many hours in our libraries, is actually doing this research to do that track back. BHL expedites this process and cuts literally years off of the process of species description. And again, our commitment to open access is vital in order to provide access to this to people around the world. And I liked this quote from one of our researchers at the Bishop Museum in Hawaii, Rich Pyle. I'm increasingly convinced that the study of biodiversity is far and away the most important endeavor in the history of humanity. As we all know, the biodiversity library is burning. Unlike physics, unlike chemistry, unlike geology, the clock is ticking on our ability to capture this information before it's gone. You've probably all seen the many reports about the dual crises of climate and biodiversity loss. And again, this is a prime problem of our time. Here are 3 particular species from the Hawaiian Islands documented in this book by Walter Rothschild, the Aviafauna of Luzon. All 3 of those species have gone extinct through anthropogenic means in the last 150 years. And the only documents of these species are in the literature contained in BHL and the species and the specimens contained in our natural history museums. BHL has been acknowledged as a key resource within the global community of biodiversity acronyms to provide global leadership in integrating specimen data, taxonomic observation, genomes, and published literature of the natural world. But I also like to highlight that BHL is not just a digital library, but again, looking back to Darwin and his compatriots in 1858, where Darwin noted that a complete scientific museum should be exclusively attached to an appropriate library or collection of books and illustrations relating to science, fully independent of any general library. And I think that's what really makes BHL special in the world, because we are attached to the great natural history museums, botanical gardens, and research centers, and are working directly with specimens in those collections. And that is really what amplifies the effect of BHL. BHL makes the history of science available to anyone. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Caxton Club, for having us here tonight. This room is spectacular and very inspiring, and thank you too to everybody who came from so far away to the BHL meeting this week. It's been wonderful to have you here in our city and to be able to show you our institutions and share this wonderful city with you. So thank you. My name is Gretchen Rings. I'm here from the Field Museum of Natural History. Many of you were there today seeing our collections, and this first slide is a book plate, one of our book plates that is, that we use in the library. Edward Eyre is probably a name that is familiar to many of you here in this room. He donated his natural history books to the Field Museum, particularly his ornithological works and ichthyological works. But he, many of his Americana books he donated to the Newberry Library. They also hold his papers as well. So he is a very important figure in Chicago history and in the Field Museum's history. Because of him, our museum exists. He famously twisted the arm of Marshall Field. If you remember Marshall Field's back in the day, the department store, which is now Macy's. But he twisted his arm to give $1 million to form the Field Museum out of the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893. It was an opportunity that was too hard to resist because, of course, you had many countries here in Chicago contributing their cultural wares to the city, and the opportunity came up to take a lot of those and form the Field Museum. And actually, it was called the Field Columbian Museum in 1894 when it opened, to reflect the fact that it was based on the Columbian Exposition of 1893. So eventually we moved on from that, but as you can see from this letter that is on the screen, he talks about leaving the world a better place, and he was very mindful of that. He gave his beautiful bird books to the Field Museum Library immediately after the library was formed, and so we were in the lucky position of having a wonderful library from the start rather than having to spend many years building one. This slide is from our first location. So we used to be where the Museum of Science and Industry currently is located. And the building was eventually razed. It was the last building that actually survived the fire that destroyed much of the buildings of the fair. Probably many of you know all this, but in case you don't, and it was the Palace of Fine Arts. It was the only building that was actually built to withstand, to be a true structure. The rest of the buildings were made out of plaster of Paris. And you can see there's one woman in this picture. It's 1909. She's still the only woman who is considered part of the professional staff at the time. Her name was Elsie Lippincott. Everybody is very dour in this picture. I love this picture. So she was one of my predecessors. I look to her as an inspiration, as well as the other people who have come before me. I really consider the collection something that is an honor to take care of, and that I am just one person of many who will be taking care of this collection. So that's Elsie Lippincott. Currently, the museum supports the mission of, or the library supports the museum's mission as an educational and research institution concerned with diversity and relationships in nature and among cultures. Our collection is approximately 275,000 circulating volumes, and then we have about 7,500 volumes in our rare book room. And we also, the museum archives and the photo archives are also under the library's umbrella. This is a view of the rare book room. If you ever like to see it in person, my information's on the website. Just send me an email. We are open to the public but by appointment only. And that's because we're up on a locked floor. It's a bit of a production to run down and get people. I wish I was like my colleague Leora at the Botanic Garden, just right there. But we are open for public use, so please contact me if you ever have an interest in seeing something in the collection. And then this is a picture of the Biodiversity Heritage Library site. I wanted to show you some of the books that are the most popular, that are accessed the most frequently in the BHL. So we did, like others here in this room, digitize titles and then put them in the BHL. And it's kind of surprising. I have a list of surprising titles, at least surprising to me. They're not the most beautiful or most rare. They just are the ones that people want to see. So I'm going to go through a few of those for you. This one is by one of my favorite illustrators or authors, Le Vaillant. He was a French author, explorer, naturalist, zoological collector, travel writer, and noted ornithologist. Leviant translates to the valiant. He described many new species of birds based on birds he collected in Africa, and several birds are named after him. He was among the first to use color plates for illustrating birds and opposed the use of binomial nomenclature introduced by Carl Linnaeus, preferring instead to use descriptive French names such as the batelier, meaning tumbler or tightrope walker, for the distinctive African eagle. Jacques Baraband was a French, and Jacques Baraband often worked with Le Vaillant in illustrating. He was a French zoological and botanical illustrator, renowned for his lifelike renderings of tropical birds. His pictures were based on mounted specimens, and his illustration was considered the most accurate ones made during the early 1800s. This next one, sorry, I put a plant one in there, Leora. We do have plant books. This one is, we actually have a number of medicinal herbal books in the Field Museum's collection. And our oldest book in the collection overall is the Garten der Gesundheit from 1486, which means the Garden of Good Health. And so this is another example of a medicinal herbal book. This one, I just love the picture. The title kind of says it all: a treatise on the art of breeding and managing tame, domesticated, foreign, and fancy pigeons, carefully compiled from the best authors, with observations and reflections containing all that is necessary to be known of tame, domesticated, foreign, and fancy pigeons in health, disease, and their cures. So again, this is one of the most popular books. I don't know why. And we get these lovely monthly reports from BHL of our popular books. So that's what I took this from. This one I think is really beautiful. The Natural History of British Insects. So in the case of our division of insects at the museum, it covers insects, arachnids, spiders and their relatives, and myriapods, otherwise known as millipedes, centipedes, and their relatives. Our curators and collection management staff work together closely to maintain a world-class collection of more than 12 million specimens, over half the museum's holdings. This one is Eduard Ruppel, was a German naturalist and explorer, best known for his collections and descriptions of plants and animals from Africa and Arabia. A number of our holdings within BHL are museum publications. So Fieldiana was a publication that was begun around 1895. It ended with the Geology New Series in 2010. It was kind of a controversial thing, but they pulled the plug at the museum on this scientific publication. So we have Fieldiana Botany, Zoology, Anthropology, and Geology, and those are all in the BHL. This is the catalog in 2 volumes of the Edward Eyre Ornithological Library. So going back to one of the first slides talking about Edward Eyre, he, like I said, donated his impressive collection of bird books to the Field Museum at the beginning of time of the museum, and we have this very comprehensive ornithological catalog that is in the BHL. I just think this one is charming. I really like this illustrations of the flowering plants and ferns of the Falkland Islands. And in this was published in 1921, and the review of this title called it a much needed compact flora addition to the taxonomic literature about the Falkland Islands. And that is a good point to be made about how the BHL is used. A lot of it is for taxonomic research. I know I hear that all the time from my colleagues at the Field Museum. And then these last 2 are just, again, 2 more popular books, very beautiful books from the 1800s. Actually, this one is, yeah, also from the 1800s. And just today I was like, oh, I should have put in a slide about this migration patterns of birds from 1921. This was a book that, if you know the name Nathan Leopold and Loeb, those are very famous names in Chicago. Before he was a murderer, he was a birder. So I forgot to put that slide. I mean, I wish I had put that slide in, but that is also in here. It's there are very few holdings of that title, and again, it's wonderful to have in the BHL. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here with you tonight and do this presentation with my BHL colleagues, Chicago Collection Consortium colleagues, and Smithsonian Advisory Board, and welcome everyone. I've been a member of the Caxton Club for 10 years, and tonight as we celebrate BHL, I'm pleased to share some botanical book illustrations and some background and weave some interconnecting stories from the Lenhardt Library. So we'll do a rare book tour here in the Union League Club. So my colleagues were in the rare book room yesterday, and here's a little bit more. So 17 years ago, before BHL, it would not have been possible to do this. You would have had to come out to Glencoe. But thanks to the magic of the colleagues and the institutions in this room, we can do it on PowerPoint. So for those of you who have not been to the Chicago Botanic Garden, just a couple of slides. It is a lovely place, 25 miles north of here on Lake Cook Road, right, the division between Lake County and Cook County. And we're looking at the English walled garden and the Japanese garden. And it was freezing yesterday, unfortunately, but we still went out on the tours. And here's views of the library itself and of the rare book room. So our collection in the Lenhardt Library is about 47,000 titles, 150,000 items, more or less. And we have a rare book collection, kids collection, e-journals, e-books, and everything when visitors come. Everything in this library is about plants and gardens. Yes, we're very subject specific. So botanical illustrations are science. Plants are our food and our shelter and our medicine, and botanical books were published to categorize plant life. So we might refer to them as rare books, but when they were originally published, they were, through the centuries, they were descriptions and of the scientific aspects of the plant species. And identifying plants with the same name and the accurate description of it before social media was vital through the centuries. In the 1700s, Carl Linnaeus named thousands of plants. I heard he named some animals and minerals and other things as well. His works are all in BHL. So we're looking at a photo of an image from the BHL. Flora of Peru and Chile is the translation, and by Ruiz and Pavon in 1794. And we're looking at all the parts of the plant. We have the seeds and the leaves and the leaf structure and the flowers of quinine, which is a cure for malaria, native to South America. And the microscope is not in BHL, but it's a lovely little microscope. Botanists would take it out into the field. It all folds into a little square, all the little parts. So that's how the explorers in the 1700s would go out to the field, and with their vasculum as well, as Regine has written a book about that. This is a very special book in the Lenhardt Library collection, and Hortus Isotensis, published in 1613 by Basilius Bessler. Thank you to the Missouri Botanical Garden for digitizing their copy, so we don't have to, but I can share it with you tonight. And we're looking at a beautiful frontispiece and cyclamen. And the text itself is in Latin and German, and it's just a wonderful example of botanical illustration. And the garden was named for the garden of the Bishop Johann Conrad of Gemmingen in Eichstätt, Bavaria, Germany. And it was a 17th century famous garden due to its diversity of plants. It contained many newly discovered plants to Europe, to Germany, and the bishop wanted a Garden of Eden, and that is what's captured in the book. There were plants from, There were plants from the Middle East and from the Americas, and Bessler was helped acquire the plants, and then he helped create the book. He wrote the text for the plants, hired the best artists and the best engravers to put the book together. And it has 367 plates, pages, and over 1,000 species depicted. There's more than one on the page. And cyclamen's one of my favorite plants. So beautiful, beautiful illustration. So this is before Carl Linnaeus, and the book is organized by season, which makes perfect sense for a garden because you're observing it in the season and which plants are in bloom at which time. Unfortunately, the bishop died 1 year before publication was complete in 1612, and then after he was gone, the garden degenerated, but it has been put back together as a modern garden. This is, I have so many favorites, but this is one of the favorites. Thank you again to Missouri Botanical Garden for digitizing your copy. So this is Elizabeth Blackwell, not the American physician and not some others. This is Elizabeth Blackwell, who worked out of the Chelsea Physic Garden in London. And she herself crafted 500 copper plates in just 2 years, from 1737 to 1739. Her husband, Alexander, was a cad, let's just put it that way, and the reason why she needed to find a job and support herself. And she was an exquisite artist and had a head for business, saw that there was a need for a reference source for apothecaries or pharmacists, herbal, those who work with herbal medicines. And she dreamed us this book, got support from Hans Sloane, who was a patron of the Chelsea Physic Garden. Literally, if you know the Chelsea football team, soccer, it's in Chelsea. We got to see it last summer. And so the book is put together with 4 descriptions of 4 plants on 1 page, and then there were 4 pages following it with the plants in illustration. So hollyhock, just stunning, and the peach, there are names on the bottom, and it's quite wonderful and detailed. So the BHL folks heard the story yesterday, but the Alexander Elizabeth story could be made into a Hollywood movie, and you can ask me later why, if you're interested. Another wonderful piece in the Lenhardt Library collection is The Temple of Flora by Robert John Thornton, published between 1799 and 1807. And we're looking at illustrations of lilies and tulips. The work itself contains 3 allegorical and 28 botanical engraved plates. And there are clouds and people and buildings in the background. So it's a melding of art and science, yet it's a botanically accurate depiction. And the flowers are life-size in the book. It's a folio. It's a stunning, stunning book. It is a cataloger's challenge. I was going to say nightmare, I'll say challenge. Each of the illustrations has 3 variations or states. So our cataloger in the Lenhardt Library. His name was Mary Vogel. I think it took her 3 days to catalog the book because she had to identify which state of which plate was in our library's copy. Thornton was a physician and an artist and devoted to Carl Linnaeus and his genus species taxonomy. And he went broke creating this work and left his family destitute. There's always a story. Pierre-Joseph Redoute is one of the most famous botanical artists. He was the French royal artist before the Revolution, and he was Josephine's artist after the Revolution. He was so good, he kept his head. His work called Les Roses, sorry for my French accent, is his most famous publication. And he's known as the Raphael of roses. There we are looking at the rose, one of the roses right there. In all, he painted 2,000 portraits of plants. And you can see, and he developed the stipple copper engraving technique. So you really, in those roses, you see the buds and the leaves. So there's lines engraved in copper, and then the stipple or the dots that create the wonderful, bright, jumping out of the page roses, even translated to a copper engraving and hand-colored and several hundred years old. And this is thanks to the Madrid Botanical Garden. And you can flip through each page in BHL. This is Flora of North America, Flora Borealis Americana, 1803. And this one's really very vitally important to botanists because of the species described. Andre Michaud came over to North America from France, and he himself named over 1,100 plant species, many native flora. And these would have been new to Europeans, new to the French botanists. Not too long ago, I might have said he discovered these plants, which is absolutely not accurate. The native peoples in North America knew their plants and captured them in different traditions other than ours capturing them in books and what our rare books are based on. But his name is attached to 1,100 species today. So the engravings are by Redoute and done before Les Roses. So as a librarian, I use BHL for reference work, for the naming tools that you've heard about, and this book in particular, 2 volumes, gets used a lot. Andre's son was Francois Andre Michaud, and he did similar work to his dad, but focused on trees. This is Silva of North America. And the walnuts and the acorns are just stunning. So it's botanically accurate views of these trees. Again, Redoute was the artist. And a part of the job, my job that I really love, are these rare book presentations. In the rare book room, you can feel the paper, you can smell the paper, but it's pretty good here in this gorgeous room in the Union League Club. And BHL is key to finding the research for the resources and for planning the talks and then for presenting talks like this. Okay, this is also not in BHL, but it's part of the story. It's a painting from 1830 by Julie Ribault, and that is Redoute right there in the middle, teaching aristocratic women botanical illustration. You can see all the flowers around in vases around the rooms. And he's teaching at the Paris Botanical Garden, Jardin des Plantes. And it's from the Fitzwilliam Museum collection at the University of Cambridge, England. So seeing a lot of redoute tonight. So I'm often asked, and I was tonight, what is my favorite book? It's very hard to pick just one, but Madame Vincent is definitely up there with my favorites. She exhibited at the Paris Salon in 1820 and has works published under her name, somewhat unusual for a woman of this time. And I love her works because they are detailed and true to life with all the flaws. So if you see the tulips, there's a moth on it, there's dewdrops. If you see in the cherry, there's stuff growing on the stem, perhaps moss. There's imperfections in the leaves. I feel like I'm looking at this sample of what she painted all those years ago. And her teacher was, of course, Redoute. So I wonder if she's in that the painting that we just saw previously. She did the copper engravings. She did the paintings, and Lambert did the copper engravings. So although this is one of two copies in libraries, that OCLC says one of two copies, and you can look through the entire book through the BHL. So you'll notice, well, maybe you won't notice what's missing from these beautiful botanical illustrations. There are no roots. There's no reproductive parts, because that was not proper etiquette for aristocratic women in Europe at this time. And that leads us into the language of flowers, which was a Victorian publishing craze that attributed specific meanings to specific flowers, and a bouquet of flowers could have a secret message that you might give to someone you admire. The books were small in size, 3-4 inches sometimes, and it was really a social media publishing craze. There are lots of editions of many books on this topic published or in this genre. Many of them were called The Language of Flowers by Anonymous. Another cataloging, for the librarians in the room, a lot of cataloging fun. And, but this genre opened up the doors for women to publish, in a sense, continuing the move forward. So if a book in this time is published by Anonymous, it was likely published by a woman. So the Lenhardt Library has a large collection of these books, and through a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, 62 volumes were conserved and digitized and uploaded into the Biodiversity Heritage Library. And then other Biodiversity Heritage Library partners, such as Cornell, aligned what they had digitized, what we were digitizing, and so that at this moment there are 176 language of flower books in a collection in the Biodiversity Heritage Library. BHL was vital for us receiving the grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. The agency recognized BHL as a responsible entity. If we uploaded the books to that location, they would be there and shared and be of cultural value. And the Caxton Club was supported a virtual symposium, a 4-hour virtual symposium for this grant in 2021. Thank you, Jackie, and Zarko at the time. And this is just a quick screenshot of the Lenhardt Library's content management system. So we have each is a different tab. So BHL books and BHL blog posts about those books are collected in one location. So you can flip through the pages and see why these are interesting books. What are the stories behind them? And we have some transcribed books that are ready to go into BHL, and they are here at the moment until they go into BHL. So I just want to conclude with preaching to the choir of the room, but primary sources are our collective cultural history, whether they're in libraries or museums or private collections, and they're really vital to retain as original objects to preserve for future scholarship and reinterpretation. And digitization of these materials is essential to enable them to be shared and discovered, and this is what BHL does so beautifully with the over 61 million pages of works. It's a remarkable resource for climate scientists and historians and researchers and students. And as I've said, as a botanical librarian, I depend on BHL. But even beyond those attributes, if that wasn't enough, the new direction of BHL with technological advances in data science, new discoveries are able to be generated from mining the data, something that you just can't do from a print book. So the full text of the records, the full text are more than when you can mine it and find geographic species, and you can, the future, we've had wonderful, amazing conversations today. The future of BHL is in the sciences, in addition to all of this wonderfulness. And then unlike for-profit databases, BHL is free. All you need is a phone or a tablet, a computer, and it's equitably available to all across the globe. The power of our combined libraries into one entity is much more than any of us could do alone. So BHL is a treasure. There's nothing else like it. It's an asset to our partners and our affiliates and our community of users. Thank you.
How do we choose what goes on the BHL? There's a really wonderful tool that BHL has called Gemini, which has a ticketing system, and that is often based on what external users are asking to be digitized. But we also just find stuff in our stacks that we're like, this, no one else has this, let's digitize it. So it's a little bit of both, at least at the Field Museum.
The same for the Chicago Botanic Gardens Library. If it's on the shelf and it's wonderful and it's not in BHL yet and it's not a well-represented book in OCLC, not too many copies, then it goes into the file for being a candidate.
I'll also just add that Bianca Crowley, our collections manager, along with our past chair, Constance Ronaldo from the Museum of Comparative Zoology, worked on an extensive collection development plan for BHL, which outlined all of the different areas in which BHL should collect, what we should collect, what we can collect in all the different areas of natural history. But I think the key thing is that our partners within BHL have 100, 200, 250 plus years of experience in collecting natural history. So when you look at our partners, they have been experts for hundreds of years in collecting what's most important to natural history. So we really rely on the collections of our partners because they are the ones that know best what should be in BHL and what we can do to provide that content to the world through BHL.
How do you address what the knowledge in representation?
Well, we have a no Frankenstein, I don't know what the word is. If there's a book that has, we digitize cover to cover. The physical book and the digital version of it should be identical. So we're not editing books. We're not, oh, that's missing a page, I'll put it in. We leave the books as they are, as if you would come out and see it. And then you can write about it. You yourself can, whoever's the interested party can take that into account for their research. That's from the Chicago Botanic Garden.
I'll also add that one of the successes of BHL is we have not put ourselves in the middle of the taxonomic wars. So again, researchers are battling over where species fit in a taxonomic tree, what something's called, whether they're lumping species or splitting species. And our colleagues at the Global Names Architecture, who are with us tonight, have really been working to help do the taxonomic intelligence to find the species names. So we generally consider what we do is species name string finding. So we are not vetting the validity of names in the current taxonomic structure. Dima could perhaps correct me, but something along the lines of 10% of all species change names every year as they're moved from one genera to another. So again, BHL is documenting what did exist, and then it's up to the researchers, again, to then validate that against what the current science is.
I would also add that certainly historically there are some really fascinating books that show the lack of knowledge, but it's a lot of times humorous. Like there's a book that we have in our collection where there was thought to be a bishop fish and it looks like an actual bishop. There's like all these urban legends that people took to be fact. And so those are really fascinating books just in their own right. Same with manatees. They were thought to be mermaids at one point. So I think those are really fascinating books to bring out and show like how much we have learned since then.
Is there a collective consider this guy? So is there a collective consider this gaps that you're really in the world? And it's always a district collaboration with libraries and they have numbers of so I think you get that activity or
Yes. So again, as one of my colleagues mentioned, we have a issue tracking system where we can actually track what this Desiderata list is. And again, there's a lot of limitations on to which of our partners has the material that can be digitized. And we are limited, again, by often intellectual property rules for more current publications. And again, the historic bindings of material. So again, many of the digitization equipment that we use cannot digitize certain materials. So again, there's lots of things we would like to digitize that we just can't for physical reasons because we don't do destructive digitization. And the expense of disbinding and then digitizing and rebinding is too much. So again, there's a vast desiderata list of publications. Just random geeky thing. There's something called the Index Animalium, which is an index of all the animal names from 1850 back to 1758. And it's the first description of those animal species. And that's one of our primary desiderata lists, is to hit all of those initial first descriptions of animal species from that 1758 to 1850. And we've done a pretty good job of getting nearly all of those done so far.
Sarah.
Do any of you or other contributors to the data show put on their data sets, scientific data sets, and if so, we have to have format guidelines and models, data or tools for example, visualization tools so that put our software to use into the next person or digital data sets, scientific data sets.
I will answer that question because I answered it a few days ago at Boston at the Association of Research Libraries meeting, where I gave a presentation on BHL along with Tamar and some of our other ARL colleagues. BHL does not do strict data sets. So we reserve the data set universe to other organizations, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. So they are the organizations that manage pure data sets. I mentioned the Smithsonian's projects around marine geo and forest geo, where they're collecting vast amounts of data about the environment. So again, BHL really focuses on the published and archival materials, and we leave data sets to other organizations.
with the lesson that you both from what you've done with the experience of what made you work about this? What were the key that there's some elements that you take a cultural learning or just guiding principles because you want to buy that on line or the response and there's the diversity of everybody why so hard of this? How do you do more of this?
The community.
Yeah.
The community librarians are giving, sharing, wonderful people. And the Lenhardt Library, we're an affiliate. We were on the outside, but as it came together, we've watched through the years and seen how it grows. So,
And I would also say, seeing my colleagues who are scientists, how much this has meant to them, how much they appreciate this as a resource, kind of keeps us pushing us along.
I didn't use a slide today, which I often use, but basically BHL rests on three legs, which are again the library and literature in the library and literature component, the science component, and the technology component. And it's those three feet of the stool that really make BHL work and often distinguish it from other digital library projects because it really is science, technology, and the content.
Does the DHL have a proactive response to British Library Act for non-coloring?
We do not, and British Library is not actually a partner. However, there have been other hacks from some of our major institutions. I won't name them, although they're in the room tonight. So again, that again is one of the fragility aspects of technology writ large.
I'm very conscious of this. Maybe when I was could you help us something where everybody looks at your shows and kind of situation
one of the wonderful things about BHL is we can actually highlight and introduce a broader audience to biodiversity through these wonderful illustrations of 600 years of information. But if you look at the 61, almost 62 million pages of BHL, it's actually boring to the common user. It is very precise data. It is often in Latin, which is the language of botany up until relatively recently. It is abbreviated. It gives habitat descriptions. It gives very detailed scientific descriptions about size, length, etc. of organisms, color. And that's really sort of the key data of BHL, and that's the type of data that we're really trying to liberate. So again, how we can actually categorize all of that data within BHL to provide the important aspect, which is occurrence data and longitudinal data, where we can actually show this species lived here at such and such a time that we know, we have it documented. So again, in some ways, I consider the illustrations the gateway drug to BHL, and it's the way to actually introduce a broader community to this type of science. And I know that's often challenging when we're talking to our scientists when they really just want to see how we can actually database this literature, which is what we are doing. And again, the other kind of key thing, especially with plants, dried plant specimens are really unattractive. So if any of you have been to an herbarium, they're flat, squat, brown things stuck on a piece of paper like this big. And the illustrations actually do document what they might have looked like in actual life. So it's a little bit of both there.
So let me go back to the prior ones, the questions that we have on that. and then ask you maybe the top one or two things. What does the DHL need? What's it currently need in order to keep doing what it's doing and to build on what it's starting to do? If you want to sort of if you get the agency to help DHL become a mission, what is it that you need?
Yeah.
Staff and money. And time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would echo that. Funding and use. There's, just an infinite audience for this. A lot of artists can use this. It's not just scientists. It just has an infinite possibilities, in my opinion, but it does need to be funded.
And I think I would say, please try and understand that library and archives are part of the science ecosystem, and how actually can the work that we have done as librarian and archivists over the last 200 or 300 years in collecting, maintaining, preserving, providing access to this, feed into current science systems, such as the one you are working on yourself, Deb, and how, again, we can actually continue to make this 300, 400, 500, 600 years of data that's in book form actionable and usable by the researchers in our museums, archives today.
I'm going to cheat just a little because I received a question via iWatch for you, which is, if there is a library or archive who is not a BHL member, how do they go about becoming a member?
That's for you.
One of the challenges we face with BHL is providing return on investment to be a member, and to be able to provide systems in order for that library to provide content. So again, as Leora mentioned, staff and money are a problem. So again, how we can actually mobilize content from libraries, especially smaller libraries, can be challenging. And the amount of hand-holding and technology that we need to make that happen is challenging. So again, we really love institutions that want to be part of BHL to support the BHL mission. But again, it's often hard to get that data from those libraries without a lot of hand-holding. So again, we welcome partners to be part of the spirit and promotion of BHL, but in many cases, it'll be harder to get your content into BHL with our current technology platform. And that's something we are hoping to be improving in the coming years.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the Caxton Club. Thank you very much, Sarah Pritchard, and to the Union League Club. Thank you very much, Jackie. And thank you from the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives and the Biodiversity Heritage Library.
As many of you know, it is a tradition at the Caxton Club that we give signed copies of our Caxtonian publications to all of our speakers as gifts, as a small thank you for the enlightenment you've brought us this evening. In this case, we have prearranged. Usually we send the book around the room and everyone has to sign them. We couldn't do it quite that way this time, but we have signed copies, presentation copies of one of our bestsellers, Chicago by the Book, 101 publications. Each page is about a different famous Chicago book. Published by the Caxton Club about 5 years ago?
About 5 years ago.
So I will present with our gratitude to each of our speakers, Chicago by the Book.